Welcome to episode 19 of the Hipsters United podcast. My name is Chris, and joining me this week are Jason.
Hello.
Jill.
Hi.
And Andrew.
Hey.
This week we don't have a release date for Glow yet, nor do we have one for If All Goes Wrong, the Fillmore DVD, but we did get the last dates of the August tour. First, though, a bit of news. Despite my previous assertion that Boca Raton is all 75-year-olds, after the concert there last week, Billy spoke to a group of presumably younger fans about the possibility of documenting the writing and recording process of upcoming songs in a regularly scheduled series of internet videos. So, Andrew, is Lonely Billy 15 something you'd be interested in watching?
Well, I think we've put forward this thought of the Pumpkins documenting their recording process, and I think as I recall, our verdict on this was that it was a bad idea. I think who knows how it will turn out, but I think recording is I imagine it's a lot like making sausage, and you probably may not be all that interesting to see or it may be too much detail to see all the stuff that goes on, all the transformations songs take, and sort of the revising that constantly will be going on. I think, and getting the fans involved. I think that's the part where it's dangerous, is that there's going to be fans who say, "Oh, I liked how that song was last week versus this week," or they're going to say, this song, they should give up on this song because this song is not going anywhere. And I don't know how you get that sort of dialogue going on before you have a final product. It sets up a lot of goodwill, and may end up making the release of the album that they eventually come up with people will be less looking forward to the album because they already know what it's going to sound like. So it'll be interesting to see how they do it, if they do it, and how the fan reaction is going to be. And if Billy's already complained earlier about how he was surprised with the negative reactions that the Fillmore shows got, and they're making that in the DVD. So maybe he wanted to make an album the same way, with the fans involved, and see how that goes, and make that a interesting experiment. And I guess Billy's a braver artist than I would be if I was in his position.
Are you saying that Billy Corgan might have self-mutilating tendencies in an artistic realm?
I wonder whether the time and money required to do something like this would be even worth it to the band in the long run. I mean, I can't imagine the audience for something like this would ever expand beyond, the same hardcore fans that already follow the band. And I kind of agree with you, Andrew. Of course I would watch it if it were out there, but I think you're right. I think it would generate a lot of, kind of the same as when we talked about the official website and whether they should put studio recordings or recording session rehearsal type things on there. I think there'd be a lot of people who would either hear it, get discouraged and stop paying attention, or hear it and then get mad that it doesn't sound the way that it did last week or the week before.
You guys don't think you don't really think anyone will be excited by it? That it won't attract any new attention to the band that'll be positive? Because, believe it or not, the whole world is not full of mopes on internet message boards who just, find everything that's given to them for free as, a burden. Personally, assuming that it doesn't really distract them from their work, and, seems very attuned to that concern. He's saying he wants to have a partner to do it, some sort of internet network. He's not really thinking about running it himself.
Right.
And I think with that attitude, if you can get the partner to do the work and to just film you, and you obviously have to be involved, but if your involvement is small or it's minimal, and you can go about your work without disruption, to me personally, that's a huge plus. I would love it. But I'm very comfortable in my ability to say, wow, now I have not only the finished product, but also the earlier product. I can choose which one I like better and listen to it. This is great. This is a win-win. That's just me. That's how I tend to think about things. Maybe some other people are like, wow, that earlier version was so much better, but now that the final version's out, I can never listen to the earlier version again, so things are worse now. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because obviously you do still have the earlier version. It doesn't vaporize when the album comes out. So I've never really understood this, like, criticism, like, I liked the earlier version. It's like, you have the earlier version. Just listen to it. Like, shut up. I don't really get it.
Well, as an economist, what if, going back to something you mentioned in one of our earlier podcasts, what if there's a trade-off here? What if by spending money on doing something like this, that means we don't get something else, like, I don't know, an official release of some, like, Zeitgeist outtakes or Chicago songs or something like that? I assume that even if they do get a partner, that the band would still have to kind of pony up some cash for something like this.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds to me like Billy's thinking about that, and he's trying to look for a low, a way with a low expenditure of effort and money that he can make this happen, and I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't see this as hugely. I mean, if he was saying, we're going to start up a production company, and we're going to have our own TV show broadcasting out of our new Smashing Pumpkins TV studios, I would be like, wow, that's probably really bad. For that exact reason, that starts to become a distraction. But that doesn't sound like the way he's thinking about it at all. To me it sounds like he's saying, yeah, this isn't going to happen if we have to do it. And it kind of reminds me of this podcast, Chris, which is when we started it and you came to us saying, I love your blog, you guys should do a podcast. And we were like, yeah, I don't think we can do a podcast, but if you want to run the podcast, we'll take part in it, right? And so that's been like a small expenditure of effort on our part, but we get the big return of having a podcast, as opposed to us having to run the podcast and do it, which I think actually would have detracted from the blog. Do you know what I mean?
So maybe I should volunteer to go film the band's studio recording.
Maybe they could hire Pure DV Productions out of Gurnee, Illinois.
Oh, gosh. I think I wrote an article for SP.com this week about Guitar Hero, and, kind of the Pumpkins' level of involvement with those projects, both in the past and upcoming. And, I think one of the points that I made in that, and then actually a few people sent me links to other articles that had been recently written actually on the day that article was published, about how a lot of news media analysts are thinking about these new types of distribution outlets as, this is the Smashing Pumpkins looking at other outlets, other ways to kind of, attract the fan base, because you have the built-in, let's say you have, you devote an entire channel on YouTube to music production for the Smashing Pumpkins. Well, there are any other bands doing that right now. I mean, Jason he cheekily alluded to Lonely Girl 15, I believe, is the previous internet project, and didn't that get like 120 million views? I mean, if you have this huge built-in set of publicity tools at your disposal, and you're the first one kind of break ground as an artist, putting your creative process out there for people to see, I think that's going to garner a lot of publicity for you, and it's going to be positive. I mean, granted, there will be detractors, but it's going to be positive. And like the band, I will do a little bit of self-analysis on it. I think it's an interesting outlet for the Smashing Pumpkins as well to review their own studio work and see what they like and don't like. about it. I was watching. It reminds me in part of this ridiculous Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, in which Larry found a new neighbor in his community who happened to be a senator, was Rob Corddry from The Daily Show, videotaped his golf swing, and he improved, one of his shots tremendously just from watching the actual act on video. So I'm wondering if the band is not trying to break new ground in new media ventures, but also look at it from maybe an objective viewer standpoint, look at their creative process and for what for them.
I guess in case I have to edit some of this out, and because of Jill's connection problems and everyone out there in podcast land didn't get to hear it, part of what Jill was saying was that, well, they're doing all this stuff with Guitar Hero, they're trying to reach new media outlets, and won't this help kind of grow their fan base if they get as many listeners or as many viewers on this as something like Lonely Girl 15? And I think that with Guitar Hero, I think there's a much bigger audience there. You have, I don't have any data for how many games Guitar Hero has sold, but it's a lot, and it's probably bigger, I would say, than the audience that they would get for a channel devoted to their recording sessions. I don't know. Andrew or Jason, do you guys think that they're going to get that big of an audience for something like this? I just kind of assume they wouldn't really get anyone outside of the typical kind of hardcore fan base.
Well, I think they get a few people, but I don't think it'll be a huge number. I mean, they're not the first band to do something like this at all. I think one of the commenters mentioned the R word, Radiohead. I think they've done something like this already. So, I don't know, sure, it'll give them some attention, and some people will discover the band through that, but, it's just going to be another way that some people discover them, as opposed to, the solution to all your problems.
Yeah, I think, they might get a little free press out of this effort if they do it, where, Entertainment Weekly or, somebody, major media outlet that people read that are kind of general popular media will pick it up and say, hey, the Smashing Pumpkins are looking to put out this internet documentary as they record their new album, and people who maybe liked the Pumpkins in the 90s and kind of didn't really catch on to the zeitgeist when it happened, or maybe weren't too impressed, they might be might re-trigger some interest. They might check it out, and maybe they'll recapture some fans and get some new ones. And I think it's worth a shot. I think if Billy's brave enough to go out to put this out there and not. I think my biggest worry is that not that they're going to have people writing bad comments in their YouTube when they put it up on YouTube, that Billy's going to, self-edit himself because of those comments. And I think it's probably not a big worry, because I think Billy is strong enough, and he knows what direction he wants to go. And he if some bunch of people with odd name users on YouTube say this sucks 100 times, he's not going to change it up just because of that. But I think it just still might be a little distracting for Billy if the feedback that the online videos get at all, and maybe he won't pay any attention, because if they pass it off to, if their only real involvement is to the 9 or 10 minute videos they do once a week, and they don't really pay too much attention to the online reaction, maybe then that won't be a problem.
Chris, what Andy just said in part, I really think might be the answer to kind of what your question is, which, I mean, it kind of seems to be like, why will they do this? Because it doesn't seem like it would attract some people. And I think Andy's thought that it might attract some media hits might be a big part of the answer. And particularly when we consider that Billy already kind of has, in his mind, a narrative of where the music world is today with regard to how you get attention. And if I may read a quote that people may recall from his interview with Rolling Stone earlier this year. This is Billy. Realistically, just being hot and talented and having a good single isn't enough anymore. You really need the extra story, like Amy Winehouse had, or a Britney freakout. Like, Radiohead putting out a great album is not enough of a story. Radiohead putting out a free album, and blah blah, that's the story. So it becomes more media-driven, event-driven than music-driven. So, I mean, this is where his mind is, right? And he's probably thinking, this is another way to get attention for my band and for my music, right? Is to create this story around it. Look, we're online, showing you how we're making our album. Write a story about that, and then people pay attention to the Smashing Pumpkins, right? I mean, that could be part of it.
That could be very true, actually, especially when they actually do start releasing the final versions of some of these songs. I could see the news outlets picking up saying, Smashing Pumpkins released such and such song. Compare this to, we got to see all their different versions of them rehearsing it or working on it in the studio in the past. So they may not even pick it up while they're doing it, but they may pick it up after the fact, which would then generate hits in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because think about how Zeitgeist kind of quickly got thrown in the bargain bin, so to speak, at least when it comes to the critics. It's kind of like it got reviewed really quick and then it was like over, right? And compare that to how, when I mean, and I know this is because it's the Pumpkins and because it's, another band like Radiohead, but, I'm mentioning Radiohead. Everyone freak out.
Again.
Take a drink,
but,
everyone.
When In Rainbows came out, Pitchfork, I'm mentioning Pitchfork. Oh, man, I'm so wasted. They did like this huge track-by-track analysis of In Rainbows, and a lot of it was about how the tracks had developed from the live versions or whatever other versions they'd seen before, And I don't expect, any of the, I don't expect necessarily, certainly that site is going to start doing that sort of thing for the Pumpkins, but I certainly think other sites will, It seems like a pretty music-focused way to go in terms of things you could do to get attention. I mean, he's at least not going the Amy Winehouse route of, walking around. Well, I guess I shouldn't talk about him walking around shirtless right now, because he does seem to be going that way. There seem to be other ways you could go about trying to get attention, and this, if that's what the end is, this is not too bad of a way to go. That's it.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, that's all the news that we had last week outside of the end of the August tour, so let's head to our tour roundup. The band played a show in Raleigh, North Carolina last week, followed by 3 dates in Florida, one of which got postponed by the tropical storm that seemed to hover over the state all week. And the set list didn't change outside of a few teases during Set the Controls, but Billy did bring his niece out on stage to provide assisting vocals on Once Upon a Time, which we heard during the podcast intro. And now that the tour is over, I can officially award the imaginary $100 to Jason, who correctly predicted that Siva would be played. None of the rest of us were correct in our guesses. We'll have to try and win our imaginary money back for the 20th anniversary tour.
I promise to use it wisely.
We talked a lot about the tour last week, but does anyone have any final thoughts about the last few shows? I think I'm
anxious to hear Tom Sawyer with Ginger on vocals. It was a quiet defense, hiding out the base events.
I think it definitely got looser towards the end. I think, especially, in the shows where they brought out their family member, like little Ava. That's a neat little moment, and was neat to see that show up on YouTube. So sure it was fun for them to sort of, they had this pretty straightforward set list, and then they kind of started mixing it up at the end, which was neat to see.
We need to do a Hipsters United investigative report. Is Ava spelled with an E or an A? Read the blog at hipstersunited.com to find out.
I'd say definitely check out the recording of the Raleigh show also that's on the Live Music Archive. The sound quality of that one is probably the best sound quality version of any of the August tour dates that are out there yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about last week, that's one of the benefits of having a tour with all the same set lists, is you can just kind of pick the best one or the one that we got the best recording of, and so far I think that would be it.
That's one of the benefits. Did you just say this about them not changing the set list?
Yes, I did.
Okay, sorry. My brain blinked for a moment. I didn't quite catch what you were saying. That's right. Unless you need the Ava vocals, then there's only one recording for you.
That's true. Jill, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm thinking about what I've thought about this last week, and one of the things that I read earlier today, actually, it was kind of funny. I was thinking about how Tropical Storm Faye was derailing the Smashing Pumpkins dates as well, and believe it or not, the Stone Temple Pilots were also playing Central Florida this past week, and had to postpone one of their shows as well, although the rumors abound that Scott Weilander is up to his old antics and has been seen on stage doing some fairly crazy things, though playing timpani is not among them. So,
what about standing up straight? Was that part of his repertoire?
No. In Arizona earlier this summer, he ranted incoherently between some songs, forgot lyrics, and fell backwards into a drum kit, according to PerezHilton.com. So at least Billy's mobile. So that's one thing we can say for him. No, I thought that, at least what I read and what I thought, they definitely loosened up a lot, and it looked like a really fun time. I thought it was really funny, that video that you posted, Jason, at the end of the video where the audience member was like, "No, it's a theremin." Theremin.
TH.
So, in his defense, I've never heard of such a thing either. So, guess I'm not as gearhead as I thought.
Notably used on Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. That's the most famous theremin in history, I believe.
Good to know.
Well, for our in-depth discussion this week, I wanted to take a look back at a topic that we missed a few weeks ago due to our coverage of the August tour. Right before the tour got underway, the Pumpkins Media Militia, as in the group of writers, not the person who formerly went under that moniker, on SmashingPumpkins.com posted a series of articles about the current state of the Smashing Pumpkins fan community. And first, Sunky wrote an article summarizing the recent history of the online fan community. Then Simon interviewed a group of fans about their opinions of the relationship between the band and the community. And next, all of the SP.com writers got to submit a question to Billy and Jimmy, which they answered then in a series of 2 articles. And finally, Super Vajra closed the series with a piece on the evolving band clashing with our static memories and need for consistency. So, Andrew, the first thing I wanted to ask is, do you think that the fan community was accurately characterized both by Sunky and the band themselves?
Well, I think I think there's always the danger when you're trying to capture the, in a couple of paragraphs, or even a lot of paragraphs, you're going to make a whole lot of statements, or you're going to simplify, and you're not going to, someone's going to be mad at me for
you're unable to say anything because you're so afraid that they're going to get you.
Right. And for not getting my words out properly. I think, it's hard to I think it's a decent effort, and, I guess, it's not, it's interesting for them to try to even, undertake this, task of sort of capturing the state of the fan community and the current relationship between the fan community and the band is right now at this moment, and the recent history of the interactions. And so I think there was a lot of things that, it was a very broad brush, but a good effort, and it was pretty interesting to read, but I'm running out of things to say right now.
Sorry. Chris,
Jason?
It's your question. You want to take a shot at the answer? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think we had an article on hipstersunited.com about it when Sunky posted his article, and I think I commented in there that I thought that there was a little bit too much focus on the discussion communities aspect of the online community, like Netforia, Blammo, those kind of places, and not enough on kind of not the the community talking to each other, but kind of the fan-run projects, like the SPFC, the SPLRA wiki, where they keep track of all the different shows and the stage banter and things like that, and the live music archive, which we already mentioned. And all of these are not only invaluable resources that are a direct result of fans having a positive impact on the community, but I wonder even if the band really, I think the band may be aware of it, but I don't know if it really is being taken into account. Like, Jason, what do you think is the band's perception of the fan community? Do you think it's a positive one, a negative one? I know Billy doesn't go online too much, but do we have any sense of that?
I think Billy's perception of the fans probably depends on the day of the week or the hour of the day. I think he sees the good and the bad, but I never really think of Billy as having really fully integrated, consistent opinions on things. You know what I mean? And I don't say that seems really critical, but I actually don't say it to be too critical. I mean, even though I strive for that sort of thing myself in my own life, I try to integrate my mind and have the same thoughts as much as I can. But the older I get, the more I think consistency is a little overrated. And I think if you look at the sum total of what Billy says, you can find a lot of comments where he disparages the fan base, and you can find a lot of comments where he praises the fan base greatly. Says they have, everything from the greatest fans in the world to, the fans are abandoning me. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
you can find everything in between those two poles, like, over the course of his career. The concept of the fan community is a difficult one for me to think about, because on one hand, you think of a community as like people who are interacting with each other. And so in one sense, I think, talking about the internet where people are talking to each other about the band. And I mean, think about it. Where else are people talking about the band? Are people having meetups at local coffee houses to talk about the Smashing Pumpkins? Probably not. So, I mean, I think when you talk about a community in sense of people who are interacting with each other, talking about the band, you probably are right to be talking about mostly online sorts of communities. But at the same time, you could kind of dispense with the notion that you're thinking about fans interacting among each other, and you could just think of the fan base as like a huge group of people. And those people all have some relationship to the band, whether or not they're relating to each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you think about the fan base, I think things with the fan base, at least judging on the shows I just went to see, I think are pretty good. Like always, they sent some people home disappointed, but that's because, as Billy famously says, they're not there to kiss your ass, I mean, they do not come out and put on, like, we're going to play everything you want to hear in such a way that, like, makes you think maybe we're not going to play the song you want to hear, and then we play it. Like every other rock band ever does, They're not, like, going to see the Foo Fighters. It's not like going to see the Chili Peppers. Billy's going to give you some of what you want, and he's going to give you some of what he thinks you should hear, And it's the attitude of an artist, It's not the attitude of a entertainer so much, I think, you almost have to have, to really enjoy the Pumpkins from a concert attending standpoint, I think you also almost have to think of yourself as a patron of the arts. I'm going to pay my $40 and I'm going to trust in Billy Corgan to put on a show that I should see. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people don't, fans of rock and roll, that's not typically the mindset they have in mind. You know what I mean? So, a lot of those fans, particularly the ones who are drawn in by modern rock radio, are going to be turned off. But, I see just as many. We have a blog, and so...
We may have mentioned it on the podcast before.
Increasingly, yes. I come to think of myself as like, well, I'm part of the, I'm a blogger, I'm in the blogosphere, as opposed to the discussion board-based community, And so a lot of my reading is other blogs, and I find them through these blog searches. I type Smashing Pumpkins into Google blog search, and I see what comes up. And I get to read all sorts of people who just have their own blog. It's like their own live journal or their own, on whatever site. It's like a personal blog, and they'll be like, I went to see the Smashing Pumpkins last night. And I tell you, for every one of these, I'm really disappointed they didn't play the songs I wanted to hear ones, you get something like, my boyfriend took me, and this band Smashing Pumpkins blew me away. You know what I mean? And so, I don't know. I think Billy's attitude and toward the concert experience, it does tend to lose him some of the, the radio fans. Once they go see the band, they get disenchanted and they're like, wow, that's not what I thought they were. But at the same time, I think it attracts people who don't really know the band. You know what I mean? You could boil it down to saying something about open-mindedness and really make it like a negative on the radio fans and a positive on these other people, which, I don't know. I'm sure people will jump to that conclusion. I'm not trying to criticize the radio single-based fans, really, because that's how I got into the band. But I'm just saying I think that dynamic is there. So.
And I think to that point, I think what you said, Jason, about considering them artists and considering them to be kind of an art experience is really important. In the interviews that Billy Corgan and Jimmy Chamberlain gave to SP.com, one of the things Jimmy said was, and I quote, "As we moved on as artists, we had to be willing to take the consequences for not playing ball with the mainstream. We had to make a choice as to what was more important to us, art or someone else's version of success. We consistently chose music, and we found a home there." And end quote, basically. And I think, they both Billy and Jimmy acknowledge how important that is to them as sort of creative, collaborative artists. They wouldn't. He says later that that being able to count on consistency in an artist is in direct opposition to the point of being an artist, which is to evolve. And so I think that probably from a general audience standpoint, this is a little frustrating because, many of the artists out there, like Madonna, just went on tour. I think that, many of the fans out there of music in general go to some of these huge concerts. Madonna just started her new concert series last night, I believe, in Wales, I think. And, everything is choreographed down to a T. There's no sense of spontaneity or, there's a sense of artistry, but it's in the spectacle, the choreographed spectacle itself. I think when you go to a Smashing Pumpkins concert, as a general concert goer, if you're not necessarily a fan and just, kind of going for the sake of being entertained, it's a lot more dynamic than what you tend to expect going to other types of concerts, and that may be off-putting to people because you can't expect that everyone is going to be satisfied with a 20-minute timpani solo. So it's a difficult thing to expect of your audience, but as a fan,
he doesn't play a 20-minute timpani solo.
So, but he does play 20 minutes of Set the Controls. So you have to kind of expect different things when you go. And if you don't have expectations, or you have certain expectations of a concert going experience in general, I think that it's a dangerous sort of binary street that you can go down. Either you love it or you don't like it that much, or hate it, I guess, as many people blog about. But, for me as a fan, I think I've seen the band enough to know that I shouldn't really have any expectations besides just immersing myself in what the band is offering. And I tend to think I have a great time when I go because, my expectation is to really expect very little. And so I guess if you set yourself up for really low expectations, you're always happily surprised. But, like you said, there is this really intensive feeling of artistry behind the shows that, has attracted me for how many ever years now? 14 years.
You at least.
Yeah, right. And I think that it really relates to this sense of artistry. So,
well, Jill, as an SP.com writer, you took part in the series of articles, and I think that in the little intro paragraph before each one, it said that kind of this was the band's idea, or Billy and Jimmy's idea, to do this whole thing, and that one of the purposes they had for doing it was to kind of narrow the gap in expectations between the band and its fans, and kind of set I think he said, in one of his interview answers, he said to, quote, promote honest discourse on the ever-changing subject of what is a reasonable expectation of a band that is about to enter its third decade of work, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think they achieved that with this series of articles? Do you think that there's been reasonable discourse? Do you think that that we are, as fans, are clearer about what our expectations should be?
When this series of articles first started up, I had real concerns about where it really was going, and this was, of course, before we actually sat down to write questions and get answers from the band. I think, Billy talks a lot about his own spiritual in the interview, and kind of how dissatisfied he has been with the fan community, maybe not the fan base, but the online fan community's reaction to each other. And, he says, and I quote, before I quote, I would preface this by saying, a lot of this discussion, what he thinks of it as being in the fan community, doesn't really have to do with music at its core. And he goes on to say, and I quote, it has everything to do with kinship, and we as a society don't treat our brothers and sisters very well. So even though it seems like I'm saying a lot, I'm actually saying very little that touches what I want to really talk about, which is God and love and happiness, which are all one and the same. I'm happy to answer these questions from you, or I wouldn't bother. But if someone really wants to know what I'm thinking, they would talk to me about those things that truly matter to all of us. Because those principles, God, love, happiness, are in every Smashing they're before they're always at all times. And that's the end of that quote. And this is probably a bit different than where you're not going to go with this answer, but Billy has actually talked about this several times in the last few interviews I've seen from him. He talked about this in the interview as well. And in terms of trying to rectify or reconcile the sense of the band's interaction with the community, I think he's done an interesting job of basically putting himself out there in a way that says, this is what we're about. We want you to be on board with us if you understand it. And, if you don't understand what we're doing right now, then that's great that you have these great memories and these great feelings towards our old catalog. But, focus on the things that matter and are important. And, I think this is indicative of how he and the band have grown up as artists over the last, 7-8 years since they disbanded. And I think that, in terms of my expectations about this series and what we're going to get out of it from the band, it actually was a pleasant surprise, because trying to focus on more positive-minded and positive karmic issues, perhaps. Because I think it's got to be really frustrating to have, a really long career as an artist with a lot of commercial success, and a lot of the people that follow your work are bickering on the internet. And I don't think that he has a lot of agency to do much about that, but I think he's trying to get people to look at things in a different way than they have been. So has he fully set the expectations for what the fan base could expect from the band? No, but, how do you do that besides opening up a discourse?
That's a good point, and I thought one thing that kind of, I don't know if it bothered me, but it was kind of, I thought was kind of ironic, was that he talks about promoting a discourse, but in the articles that were written on SmashingPumpkins.com, no one was able to comment on them. So it seems like a discourse is difficult when there's no back and forth. But I know that you have nothing to do with that, so it's kind of...
Well, I think...
Chris, are the comments on a post a back and forth, really?
It's not a back and forth with the band, but a back and forth. A discourse implies some sort of discussion, even if it's a discussion amongst the community themselves, and I think that's kind of what Billy meant. But
I think it implies a willingness to hear what you guys, what the readers have to say.
Right.
And publicly share those comments. I mean, they might read comments that people may email in, but no one else can see those emails. Whether or not they read them or not, I don't know. But it's a one-way, here's what we're saying. And if you have something to say about it, go find Netforia or Blammo or whatever.
Or hipstersunited.com.
Hipstersunited.com.
They were answering questions. I mean, I'm not totally sure how I don't know.
I mean, my initial reaction to that question, yeah, it's funny, and yes, it's like, whatever, but I think the tone of the interview that Billy gives is more so, we're willing to open this discourse as long as it's valid and has an actual reasonable and useful place in the universe of music criticism or whatnot. Because I think, when you open things up to commentary on the internet, you have thousands of people checking a site a day making, comments like grilled cheese sandwich. I mean...
Ribeye.
Exactly.
In the more philosophical sense, because he's wanting to open it up to this happiness, or what is love, or what is, God, what we say, both within a community or within my music or to my spirituality, is stuff discussed on the internet at large. And I think that there has been a lack of forum built on the...
It occurs to me that listening to Jill is kind of like a comments page. There's a lot of noise, not a lot of signal.
And there she goes.
Well, I went back and looked at this quote that he actually submitted in his interview, and it says, "I hope to promote honest discourse on the ever-changing subject of what is a reasonable expectation of a band that is about to enter its third decade of work," which is what Chris said earlier. Point there is somehow we are still here, and most of those distractions are there in the rearview mirror. Survival sometimes is the ultimate aesthetic. And then he goes on to say later, if I take a verbal torch to a bunch of narcissists posing as fans, what good does that do? And it has a lot to do with performance art, which I would consider myself one of its class. But it only has to do with music if it makes it more real. And so this is where he goes on to talk about, God and love and happiness. And I think that he's willing to say that actually entering into discourse and meaningful discourse is very useful if what you're doing is adding to, the philosophical body of work around something or is helpful in defining what they do as art. But so much of it is distracting from what they do that it's just a difficult line to toe. And
if I may, recently our blog has been more successful. Our blog at hipstersunited.com. We've received a lot more comments. And we've never really had to grapple with the notion of moderating before. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's been almost 100% hands-off to this point. But, this whole discussion just makes me think of that because... particularly what you just said. Like if someone enters into the discourse, hoping to advance it in some way, as opposed to entering the discourse hoping people will look at you and think you're cool and think you're smart, right? Like the first is useful, the second is a distraction. It's noise,
Right.
And of late, we've had a lot of comments that are clearly of the look at me variety. Aren't I funny? Aren't I clever? Aren't I smart? And 0% of the blog posts, I mean, sure. I mean, there's always a component of look at me, aren't we a smart writer? But at the same time, I feel like the spirit of the blog is to advance some sort of discourse about the band, to communicate news, or to, advance what I sometimes think of as a pro-Smashing Pumpkins agenda in a blogosphere and a music criticism world that is not necessarily always been very receptive to that viewpoint. And so I can actually, I can just, I know this is kind of a digression. It may seem like very self-centered about the blog, but maybe by analogy, people can relate a little to what Billy's maybe trying to say, which is that, a discourse is good if people are entering into it with like that kind of community spirit, and like we're building towards something, we're advancing some sort of agenda, or helping each other understand things better, as opposed to, the word narcissist is not in there by accident, in what he's saying. That word jumps out for a reason. The word is like, I like to look at myself, I like to think I'm very clever and hilarious. And maybe you are very clever and hilarious, and I can get a laugh out of it. But, it's like, if I post something, and then the first comment is like some long, like, funny thing that has nothing to do with what I just wrote, it just kind of kills the discussion. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like the whole blog post is now being played for a laugh, And I'm very tempted to start moderating with a heavier hand, as opposed to, like, literally haven't been moderating at all. But I'm really tempted to start weeding out the narcissism, but, I know people might react to that pretty negatively, so I don't know what to do.
Well, when Billy's mentioning the narcissism, I think a lot of it might also just be fans kind of craving for Billy to acknowledge their collective presence as an online community. I just have gotten the sense, I've been in the online community for a number of years now, and there's always this kind of undercurrent or sense of the fact that there's a sizable number of people that just kind of want Billy to say, hey, I know you're all out there. I don't know if you guys get the same sense.
Take me backstage. I kind of think that's the impulse. I really do. But I think it's more than acknowledgement. I think for many fans, the fantasy is I'm going to be Billy. We're going to start talking about love and happiness and ideas, and we're just going to go to the mall together. And it's hard to why. I'm not even saying that's unhealthy or bad. I think that's very understandable. Somebody puts out music and songs that you really identify with, and why wouldn't you want to communicate with that person, get feedback from them, but it's a fantasy, though. In the rock world, it's a fantasy. He's got too many fans, You want a piece of Billy? You want a piece of Billy? There just isn't enough to go around,
Well, at what point does it start to enter the psychology of, seeking celebrity, which one can argue is, some sort of a psychological disease in some cases.
And I think the idea of distraction is important. Like, I think it's important for Billy's art and Billy's music that he does stay kind of separate from the fan base and the fans in general.
Couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine how good Billy's music would be if he spent a bunch of time, like, talking to fans? That was sarcasm. I hope everyone catches up on it. Maybe if he spent 6 hours a day chatting online about what he should do, what he should think.
Well, and in the interview itself, one of the very first things that Billy talked about was, at the beginning, when they were just coming out, pre-Gish, when they were just coming out with songs and playing in a live arena, he said, quote, "We just did what felt right, usually to provoke reaction, because we were at that time in the 80s dealing with the working class that wasn't sure they liked or understood what we were doing." And, the duality of the audience and appreciating the audience versus reacting to the audience causes a very strong conflict, especially in the Smashing Pumpkins community. And, like Jason said, what would the music look like if they were spending time with a lot of people that pander to them? He's made that very clear. He made that actually very clear in the Mancow interview, where he talked about, the record label people were whining and dining them, and they just dropped them like nothing, and that caused a really, really strong emotional reaction for the band, and it was not a positive one. So it's two very bitter sides of the same coin, I guess. And in the end, it sounds like they just have to be true to themselves, because that's where the music itself gets written.
Right.
I mean, if you're out as an artist, quote quote, kind of put that in air quotes. If you're out as an artist and what you're doing is like 100% pursuing the approval of other people, you're going to end up sounding like, I don't know, the Bare Naked Ladies or something.
Miley Cyrus.
Yeah. I mean, and supposedly, the indie or alternative music fan community supposedly takes as almost its number one proposition of what it's about that it's not interested in that kind of music, right? I mean, part of me in the back of my mind has this like long-term plan or idea that someday I'm going to like try to write up, this is what supposedly the indie or alternative music fan mindset is about, and here are all the ways in which it contradicts itself, or here are all the ways where the Pumpkins should be, for example, should be appreciated when they're not, I mean, sure, in some of what I think are the lesser propositions of the indie mindset, which involve money or something, or commercial success, maybe the Pumpkins don't meet up with it. But in other ways, I think the Pumpkins are the absolute, like, perfect embodiment of some of the ideals of indie rock. And, they're trampled on generally by these critics. So I don't quite get that. But.
Well, there was nothing of note this week in Pumpkins history, but since we'll be on vacation next week, Andrew, did anything happen next week in Pumpkins history?
Yeah, how about that? This week, or next week in Pumpkin history, we're going to talk about Machina 2, the pre-internet release experiment from the year 2000, was actually released in vinyl format to friends and family of the band and a couple of online fan community members on September 5th of the year 2000, and it was a release that Billy had originally hoped to release through normal channels, but after basically Virgin was no longer interested in another Pumpkins release after what they saw as disappointing sales from the Machina album. So Billy took his music and printed up some vinyl records and gave them out to friends and instructed the online fans to rip the music onto MP3s and distribute it out to the world and put it out for download on the internet. And so it was something of a landmark in certainly Pumpkins history and in music history. I think we've talked about the fact that people were breathlessly talking about Radiohead, Take a Drink, of releasing their In Rainbows album, for free over the internet. And of course, a lot of people in the Pumpkins community were saying, "Oh, well, we did that 8 years ago, so big deal." So, so it was a pretty interesting, pretty innovative idea on Billy's part to get the last bit of the Machina session music out before they pulled the plug on the original incarnation of the band. So that's what happened. And next week in this Pumpkins history.
Well, thanks for joining us once again this week. We're going to be taking a week off next week for Labor Day weekend, so in the meantime, enjoy all the shows that are getting posted to the Live Music Archive, and keep the feedback coming at hipstersunited.com/blog. Our closing song this week is Transformer from Raleigh, North Carolina, on August 17th, 2008. So have a great holiday weekend, everybody.
realize. Good girl.
The Hipsters United podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Smashing Pumpkins, Virgin Records, or Warner Brothers Reprise Records. All opinions offered by panelists or guests of the Hipsters United podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Smashing Pumpkins. All audio during the show is licensed for non-profit use per the terms and conditions on the Live Music Archive at archive.org. Intro music is from the Machina 2 album released for free download on the internet by the Smashing Pumpkins in September of 2000.